fields of culinary and botanical science are so well known to all the world. The first three articles richly merit to be added to the domestic cookery of every family, and those which follow claim the attention of all botanists, and we are happy to be able, through Dr. Blasch's kindness, to present our readers with illustrations of his discoveries. All the new flowers are found in the valley of Berwick Weir, near the lake of Odd Grove, and on the summit of the hill Orfeld Tug.
Would you like me to read this?
Why don't you read the first?
All right. Amblongus pie. Take 4 pounds, say 4.5 pounds, of fresh amblonguses and put them in a small pipkin. Cover them with water and boil them for 8 hours incessantly, after which add 2 pints of new milk and proceed to boil for 4 hours more. Now, when you have ascertained that the amblonguses are quite soft, take them out and place them in a wide pan, taking care to shake them well previously. Grate some nutmeg over the surface and cover them carefully with powdered gingerbread, curry powder, and a sufficient quantity of cayenne pepper. Remove the pan into the next room and place it on the floor. Bring it back again and let it simmer for 3/4 of an hour. Shake the pan violently till the amblonguses have become of a pale purple color. Then, having prepared the paste, insert the whole carefully, adding at the same time a small pigeon, 2 slices of beef, 4 cauliflowers, and any number of oysters. Watch patiently till the crust begins to rise. Add a pinch of salt from time to time. Serve up in a clean dish and throw the whole mess out of the window as fast as possible. Do you want the second one?
I'll take the second one. To make crumboblious cutlets, procure some strips of beef, and having cut them into the smallest possible slices, proceed to cut them still smaller, 8 or perhaps 9 times. When the whole is thus minced, brush it up hastily with a new clothes brush and stir around rapidly and capriciously with a salt spoon or a soup ladle. Place the whole in a saucepan and remove it to a sunny place. Say the roof of the house is free from sparrows or other birds, and leave it there for about a week. At the end of that time, add a little lavender, some oil of almonds, and a few herring bones. And then cover the whole with 4 gallons of clarified crumboblious sauce when it will be ready for use. Cut it into the shape of ordinary cutlets and serve up in a clean tablecloth or dinner napkin. Yours is the third.
I don't know that I thank you. To make Gosky patties, take a pig, 3 or 4 years of age, and tie him by the off hind leg to a post. Place 5 pounds of currants, 3 of sugar, 2 pecks of peas, 18 roast chestnuts, a candle, and 6 bushels of turnips within his reach. And if he eats these, constantly provide him with more. Then procure some cream, some slices of Cheshire cheese, 4 quires of foolscap paper, and a packet of black pins. Work the whole into a paste and spread it out to dry on a sheet of clean, brown, waterproof linen. Now, when the paste is perfectly dry, but not before, proceed to beat the pig violently with the handle of a large broom. If he squeals, beat him again. Visit the paste and beat the pig alternately for some days, and ascertain if, at the end of that period, the whole is about to turn into Gosky patties. Well, if it does not then, it never will. And in that case, the pig may be let loose, and the whole process may be considered as finished.
So there are recipes for your Christmas cookery. A few bits and pieces from some authors whose names I think you'll recognize. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The star was so beautiful, large and clear, that all the other stars in the sky became a white mist in the atmosphere. Sir Walter Scott, heap on more wood, the wind is chill, but let it whistle as it will, we'll keep our Christmas merry still. Washington Irving, 'tis the season for kindling the fire of hospitality in the hall, the genial fire of charity in the heart. And William Makepeace Thackeray, as fits the holy Christmas birth, be this, good friends, our carol still, be peace on earth, be peace on earth to men of gentle will. And Carl Sandburg wrote a little poem which he entitled Star Silver. The silver of one star plays crosslights against pine green. And the play of this silver crosswise against the green is an old story, thousands of years. And sheep raisers on the hills by night, watching the woolly four-footed ramblers, watching a single silver star. Why does the story never wear out? And a baby slung in a feed box, back in a barn in a Bethlehem slum. A baby's first cry mixing with the crunch of a mule's teeth on Bethlehem Christmas corn. Baby fists, softer than snowflakes of Norway. The vagabond mother of Christ and the vagabond men of wisdom, all in a barn on a winter night, and a baby there in swaddling clothes on hay. Why does the story never wear out? The sheen of it all is a star silver and a pine green. For the heart of a child asking a story, the red and hungry, red and hankering heart, calling for crosslights of silver and green. Now, to change the mood just a little, quite a bit, as a matter of fact, S.J. Perelman, whom I hope some of you have read, was one of America's great humorists, I think. And he has a delightful little thing called Insert Flap A and Throw Away. One stifling summer afternoon last August, in the attic of a tiny stone house in Pennsylvania, I made a most interesting discovery: the shortest, cheapest method of inducing a nervous breakdown ever perfected. In this technique, the subject is placed in a sharply sloping attic heated to 340 degrees Fahrenheit and given a moth-proof closet known as the Jiffy Clothes to assemble. The Jiffy Clothes, procured at any department store or neighborhood insane asylum, consists of half a dozen gigantic sheets of red cardboard, 2 plywood doors, a clothes rack, and a packet of staples. With these is included a set of instructions and mimeographs in pale violet ink, fruity with phrases like pass section F through slot AA, taking care not to fold tabs behind washers, see figure 6. The cardboard is so processed that as the subject struggles conclusively and convulsively to force the staple through, it suddenly buckles, plunging the staple deep into his thumb. As a final demonic touch, the Jiffy Clothes people cunningly omit 4 of the staples necessary to finish the job, so that after indescribable purgatory, the best the subject can possibly achieve is a sleazy, capricious structure which would reduce any self-respecting moth to helpless laughter. In a period of rapid technological change, however, it was inevitable that a method as cumbersome as the Jiffy close would be superseded. It was superseded at exactly 9:30 Christmas morning by a device called the self-running 10-inch scale model delivery truck kit powered by Magic Motor, costing $19.99. About 9 on that particular morning, I was spread-eagled on my bed, indulging in my favorite sport of mouth breathing, when a cork fired from a child's air gun mysteriously lodged in my throat. The pellet proved awkward for a little while, but I finally ejected it by flailing the little marksman and his sister, for good measure, until their welkins rang, and I sauntered into breakfast. Before I could choke down a healing fruit juice, my wife swept in. She extended a large, unmistakable box covered with diagrams. "Now, don't start making excuses," she said. "It's just a simple toy. The directions are on the back." "Well, look, dear," I interrupted, rising hurriedly and pulling on my overcoat. "It clean slipped my mind I'm supposed to take a lesson in cross-hatching at Zim's School of Cartooning today." "On Christmas?" she asked suspiciously. "Well, yes, it's the only time they could fit me in," I confessed glibly. "This is the big week for cross-patching, you know, between Christmas and New Year's." "Do you think you ought to go in your pajamas?" she asked. "Well, that's okay," I smiled. "We often work in our pajamas up at Zim's. Well, goodbye now. If I'm not home by Thursday, you'll find a cold snack in the safe deposit box." My subterfuge unluckily went for naught, and in a few moments I was sprawled on the nursery floor, surrounded by 2 lambkins and 98 segments of the self-running 10-inch scale model delivery truck construction kit. Now, the theory of the kit was simplicity itself, easily intelligible to General Motors, Professor Milligan, or any first-grade physicist. Taking as my starting point the only sentence I could comprehend, "Fold down on all lines marked fold down, fold up on all lines marked fold up," I set the children to work and myself folded up with an album of views of Marilyn Monroe. In a few minutes, my skin was suffused with a delightful tingling sensation, and I was ready for the second phase, lightly referred to in the directions as preparing the spring motor unit. As nearly as I could determine after 20 minutes of mumbling, the magic motor was an accordion-pleated affair operating by torsion and attached to axles. "It is necessary," said the text, "to cut a slight notch in each of the axles with a knife. See Figure C. To find the exact place to cut this notch, lay one of the axles over diagram at bottom of page." "Well, now we're getting someplace," I boomed, with a false gusto that deceived nobody. "Here, Buster, run in and get Daddy a knife." "I don't want to," quavered the boy, backing away. "You always cut yourself at this stage." I gave the wee fellow an indulgent pat on the head that flattened it slightly to teach him civility, and commandeered a long, serrated bread knife from the kitchen. "Now watch me closely, children," I ordered. We placed the axle on the diagram as in Figure C, applying a strong downward pressure on the knife handle at all times. The axle must have been a factory second, because an instant later I was in the bathroom grinding my teeth in agony and attempting to staunch the flow of blood. Ultimately, I succeeded in contriving a rough bandage and slipped back into the nursery without awakening the children's suspicion. An agreeable surprise awaited me. Displaying a mechanical aptitude clearly inherited from their sire, the rascals had put together the chassis of the delivery truck. "Very good indeed," I complimented. "Now let's see, what's the next step? Oh yes, lock into box shape by inserting tabs C, D, E, F, G, H, J, K, and L into slot C, D, E, F, G, H, J, K, and L. Ends of front axle should be pushed through holes A and B. While marshaling the indicated parts in their proper order, I emphasize to my rapt listeners the necessity of patience and perseverance. Haste makes waste, you know, I reminded them. Rome wasn't built in a day. Remember, your daddy isn't always going to be here to show you. Where are you going to be? They asked. Well, at the bar, if I can arrange it. Poising tabs C, D, E, F, G, H, J, K, and L in one hand and the corresponding slots in another, I tried a union of the two, but in vain. The moment I made one set fast and tackled another, tab and slot would part company, thumbing their noses at me. Although the children were too immature to understand, I saw in a flash where the trouble lay. Some idiotic employee at the factory had punched out the wrong design, probably out of sheer spite. I set my lips in a grim line and, throwing 170 pounds of fighting fat into the effort, pounded the component parts into a homogeneous mass. There, I said with a gasp. That's close enough. Now then, who wants candy? 1, 2, 3, everybody off to the candy store. We want to finish the delivery truck, they wailed. Mummy, you won't let us finish the delivery truck. Threats, cajolery, bribes were of no avail. In their jungle code, a $19.99 Jew-jaw bulked larger than a parent's love. Realizing that I was dealing with a pair of monomaniacs, I determined to show them who was master and wildly began locking the cardboard units helter-skelter without any regard for the directions. And when sections refused to fit, I gouged them with my nails and forced them together, cackling shrilly. The side panels collapsed. With a bestial oath, I drove a safety pin through them and lashed them to the roof. I used paper clips, bobby pins, anything I could lay my hands on. My fingers fairly flew and my breath whistled in my throat. You want a delivery truck, do you? All right, I'll show you. As merciful blackness closed in, I was on my hands and knees and with my nose bunting the infernal thing along and whinnying, roll, confound you, roll. Absolute quiet. A carefully modulated voice was saying, and 15 of the white tablets every 4 hours. I opened my eyes carefully in the darkened room. Dimly, I picked out a knife-like figure. From far away, I could hear my wife's voice bravely trying to control her anxiety. Well, what if he becomes restless, Doctor? Get him a detective story, the doctor said. Or better still, some soothing picture puzzle. Something he can do with his hair.
This is not exactly a Christmas poem, but it is Irish. And I always thought that this would be a nice poem to read to my wife, Roberta, when she got old. But she hasn't gotten gray. I have. But I'll read it anyway. When you are old and gray and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. And how many loved your moments of glad grace and loved your beauty with love false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur, a little sadly, how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. John Charty had a son named Ben, has a son named Ben. And Ben was born on Christmas Day. That's a problem. And Ben wanted something special for Christmas. So John Charty, in his column in the Saturday Review of Literature of old, wrote some poems dedicated to Ben. And later he mentioned his other two children. And I want to read a couple of those poems. The first one is simply entitled Ben. There once was a something, a boy, I guess. At least he didn't wear a dress. And I guess he was people. He seemed to be, not always, but sometimes. Sometimes he was more like a bobcat, snarling mad, and sometimes a small imp, howling bad, and sometimes a great ape shaking a tree, and sometimes as sweet as a bird can be, singing the whole air full of joy. There are so many ways to be a boy, if he was a boy. And he was, I guess. Most of the people who don't wear a dress are boys. Well, some are men. But he was too small. He was less than 10. So whatever he was, it had to be some sort of boy, as you'll agree. He was even a washed boy now and then. But best of all, he was my boy, Ben. And then he wrote a poem called While I Was Shaving, also dedicated to Ben. Daddy, you know that Billy Fitch, he says his daddy says you're rich. I know you jingle, your pockets do. If you're rich, then am I rich too? I don't jingle. Well, some of the time, I have a nickel, maybe a dime, and I feel in my pocket which is which, and I can tell, but that's not rich. And not really a jingle, but sort of a clink. Is that the difference, do you think? You jingle, Daddy. I like to hear the way you jingle loud and clear, all quarters and 50 cents too. Do you like to feel them like as I do? I remembered, didn't I? And can you tell with your fingers which is which, how loud a jingle is really rich? Are you rich? I hope you are. You bought a 35-cent cigar last Sunday morning. If you're rich, why is it Mommy hasn't a stitch? That's what she said today when she bought a dress and a hat. Did they cost a lot? How much is this house? Are we going to buy a new car? Daddy, when you die, may I have the house? See, I didn't say can. I remembered to say may. Can I, huh? When I'm old as you, will I be fat and funny too? And will I be rich? That Billy Fitch says his daddy says you're rich. I hope it's true. If it is true, someday will I be rich as you. Well, Ben wasn't altogether pleased with those poems. And so John Charty wrote a poem about the whole family. And anybody who has had a family of any size will recognize themselves in this poem. It's called The Monster Den. I met your mommy long ago. She said, how do you do? I said, hello. And we talked a little about a lot, and as we talked, we sat and thought a lot or a little. And then, I guess, I asked a question, and she said, yes. And what I asked was, let me see, it must have been, will you marry me? Well, that's what she did. And I married her with a dress and a ring and a cake. Well, sir, we left our friends when the cake was gone. We kept the ring. She has it on. And she changed her dress, and we took a train to somewhere, I guess, and then a plane to somewhere else. We thought we were living happily ever after, sir, as the stories say. We didn't know then we were only starting a monster den, but that's what we did. Well, we had it in mind to have some children. The humankind was what we intended. And I will say it almost started out that way. For Monster One was pink as a rose and looked like a girl with a button nose and giggly eyes and a crookedly smile. So we called her Myra for a while. And then what happened? She grew, and after a while, there was no one but you. Where our baby has been. Well, it's Monster 2. He looked like a boy, so we called him John. Well, how could we guess what was going on? He looked like a boy, and a fine one, too. So we took him home. And he grew and grew. But he hadn't grown much before we knew what looked like a boy was really you. Mommy cried, hung her head. Someone is monstering us, she said. Our house is becoming a monster den. But we didn't give up. We tried again. And that time what we got was Ben. Yes, you. And were we happy then? Well, all I shall say is, that made 3. And I looked at Mummy, and she looked at me, and we looked again at what we had got, and we thought a little about a lot, and I sighed for Mummy, and she sighed for me as we took it home. 4. Do you see? We had finally guessed it. We knew right then it isn't really a monster den until you have at least one Ben. Well, we watched him grow, and the more he grew, the more we knew, and what we knew was, just as I say, no monster den is complete without at least one Ben. So there we were with our monsters 3, breathing out fire at Mommy and me. And what did we do? Well, what would you do? Right! We turned into monsters too. It's a poem by a friend of mine, Dwight Marsh, called One True Word. Speak, anyone who can, one true word, eloquent, sublime, embellished, or whispered plain, or shouted loud. Say out something finely true, unequivocally clear, transparent as pure water, so the light comes brilliant through. Pierce our lying, calloused ears, use crashing, brassy cymbals if you must, snarling trumpets, drums and snare, whole symphonies or a cappella choirs, or thunder it through organ pipes to startle our attention to hear. Or write to us in silence from a page, magazine or book, illuminated vellum or chapbook's yellow pulp. Convince, persuade, assure us once that through the waves of sight and sound that we have seen or heard the truth in voices spoken from the dark beyond or from an inner light. And we will see, hear, we will embrace, believe one uttered truth unchanging, more rare, more dear than love on this hurling planet rushing into space, though but an infant sleeping in a manger under warped and twisted beams which bear a roof of clay in a rainless land. Say it clear, and we will fall upon our knees and gaze. This poem's not in your program. It's very short, by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's called Otto. It's Christmas Day. I did not get the presents I had hoped for, yet it is not nice to frown or fret. To frown or fret would not be fair. My dad must never know I care. It's hard enough for him to bear.
Dickens.
Who?
That man. Did write something other than A Christmas Carol, I'm sure you know. But he did write some other Christmas stories, a number of them, as a matter of fact, and just a few little notes on Christmas, and this is one of them, called A Christmas Garland. Christmas time. That man must be a misanthrope, indeed, in whose breast something like a jovial feeling is not roused, in whose mind some pleasant associations are not awakened by the recurrence of Christmas. There are people who will tell you that Christmas is not to them what it used to be, that each succeeding Christmas has found some cherished hope or happy prospect of the year before dimmed or passed away, that the present only serves to remind them of reduced circumstances and straitened incomes, of the feasts they once bestowed on hollow friends, and of the cold looks that meet them now in adversity and misfortune. Never heed such dismal reminiscences. Few men there are who have lived long enough in the world who cannot call up such thoughts any day in the year. Then do not select the merriest of the 365 for your doleful recollections, but draw your chair nearer the blazing fire, fill the glass, and send round the song, and if your room be smaller than it was a dozen years ago, and if your glasses be filled with reeking punch instead of sparkling wine, put a good face on the matter and empty it offhand and fill another and throw off the old ditty you used to sing and thank God it's no worse. Look on the merry faces of your children, if you have any, as they sit around the fire. One little seat may be empty. One slight form that gladdened the father's heart and roused the mother's pride to look upon may not be there. But dwell not upon the past. Think not that one short year ago the fair child now resolving into dust sat before you with the bloom of health upon its cheek and the gaiety of infancy in its joyous eye. Reflect upon your present blessings, of which every man has many, not on your past misfortunes, of which all men have some. Fill your glass again with a merry face and contented heart. Our life on it, but your Christmas shall be merry, and your new year a happy one. Who can be insensible to the outpourings of good feeling and the honest interchange of affection and attachment which abound at this season of the year? A Christmas family party. We know nothing in nature more delightful. There seems magic in the very name of Christmas. Petty jealousies and discords are forgotten. Social feelings are awakened in bosoms to which they have long been strangers. Father and son, or brother and sister, who have met and passed with averted gaze, or a look of cold recognition, for months before, proffer and return the cordial embrace, and bury their past animosity in their present happiness. Kindly hearts that have yearned towards each other, but have been withheld by false notions of pride and self-dignity, are again reunited, and all is kindness and benevolence. Would that Christmas lasted the whole year through, as it ought, and that the prejudices and the passions which deform our better nature were never called into action among those to whom they should ever be strangers.
One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the sea-town corner now, and out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases roll down toward the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves, and I plunge my hands in the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white bell-tongue ball of holidays, resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out comes Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. Well, it was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son, Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland, though there were no reindeers. But there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slink and sidle over the white back garden walls, and the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined travelers from Hudson Bay off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. Wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows. Eternal ever since Wednesday. We never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or, if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house. And smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room. And the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. Oh, this was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning, all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with the newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong. "They won't be there," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." Well, there was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he said. And we threw our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero, and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance." And Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires. But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Oh, nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and said, "Would you like something to read?" Years and years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales, and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the heart-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed. But here, a small boy says, it snowed last year too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea. But that was not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewash buckets down the sky, it came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely white-ivied the walls, and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards. And the boy asked, were there postmen then too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses, on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was a ringing of bells. You mean that the postman went, and the doors rang? Oh, I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them. I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells. There were church bells, too. Inside them? No. In the bat-black, snow-white belfries tugged by bishops and storks. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Get back to the postman. Well, they were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Ours has got a black knocker. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents. Well, and then the presents after the Christmas box. And the cold postman with the rose on his button nose tingled down the tea tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his ice-bound boots like a man on fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned a corner on one foot, and, by God, he was gone. Get back to the presents. Well, they were the useful presents. Engulfing mufflers of the old coach days and mittens made for giant sloths. Zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-o-war down to the galoshes. Blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes. From aunts who always wore wool next to the skin, there were mustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crocheted nosebag from an aunt, now, alas, no longer whinnying with us. And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond, and did, and drowned, and books that told me everything about the wasp, except why. I'll go on to the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies, and a folded flag, and a false nose, and a tram conductor's cap, and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell. Never a catapult. Once, by mistake, that no one could explain, a little hatchet. And a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound. A mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow. And a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, the sea, and the animals any color I please. And still, the dazzling sky-blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boiled toffee, fudge, and all sorts, crunches, cracknels, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butterwelsh for the Welsh. And troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run. And snakes and families and happy ladders and easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Easy for Leonardo. And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick, to shake our picture off the wall. And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth, and you stood at the corner of the street, and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking. And then with a smirk, you ate it. And then it was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles like in our house? Huh. There are always uncles at Christmas. The same uncles. And on Christmas morning, with dog-disturbing whistle and sugar fags, I would scour the Swatch town for the news of the little world and find always a dead bird by the white post office or by the deserted swings. Perhaps a robin, all but one of his fires out. Men and women waiting or scooping back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos, huddled their stiff, black, jarring feathers up to my nostrils. When out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette and the violet past of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself. I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violent wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud that gobbling faces, their cheeks bulged with goose, would press against their tinseled windows the whole length of the white echoing street. For dinner we had turkey and blazy pudding, and after dinner the uncle sat in front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scuttled to and fro, bearing tureens. Auntie Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Auntie Dosey had to have 3 aspirins. But Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard singing like a big bosom thrush. I would blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up to. And when they burst, which they all did, the uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make a model man of war following those instructions for little engineers and produce what might be mistaken for a seagoing tram car. Or I would go out, my bright new boots squeaking into the white world, onto the seaward hill to call on Jim and Dan and Jack and to pad through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints on the hidden pavements. Now, I bet people will think there's been hippos. Well, what would you do if you saw a hippo coming down the street? I'd go like this, bang! I'd throw him over the railings and roll him down the hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear and he'd wag his tail. What would you do if you saw 2 hippos? Iron-flanked and bellowing, he-hippos clanked and battered through the scudding snow toward us as we passed Mr. Daniel's house. Let's post Mr. Daniel a snowball through his letterbox. Let's write things in the snow. Let's write, Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel all over his lawn. Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see it snowing? The silent, one-clouded heavens drifted on to the sea. Now we were snow-blind travelers lost in the North Hills, and vast dewlap dogs with flasks round their necks ambled and shambled up to us, baying Excelsior. We returned home to the poor streets where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow, and cat-called after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dock birds and the hooting of ships out in the whirling bay. And then, at tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave. Auntie Hannah laced her tea with rum because, after all, it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now that we told by the fire as a gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts hooed like owls in the long nights when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubbyhole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember that we went singing carols once when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each of us, one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as bold and unpleasant and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? No. Good King Wenceslas. I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness round the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen. And then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle gulping gas. Everything was good again and then shone over the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said. He was always reading. Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left, Jack said. And we did that. Always on Christmas night there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who, by now, had gotten onto the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest. And then everybody laughed again. And then I went to bed. And looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept. Just 5-minute break to spray the horse. Ready, Mr. Browning?
Yes, Mr. Dickens. The log was in the fireplace, all spiced and set to burn. At last, the yearly Christmas race was in the clubhouse turn. The cards were in the mail, all the gifts beneath the tree, and 30 days reprieve till Visa could catch up with me. And though smug satisfaction seemed the order of the day, something still was nagging me and would not go away. A week before, I got a letter from an old great-aunt. It read, "Of course, I'll understand completely if you can't, but if you find you have some time, how wonderful if we could have a little chat and share a cup of Christmas tea." She'd had a mild stroke that year, which crippled her left side. Though housebound now, my folks had said it hadn't hurt her pride. They said she'd love to see you. What a nice thing it would be for you to go and maybe have a cup of Christmas tea.
Ah, but boy, I didn't want to go. Oh, what a bitter pill to see an old relation, how far she'd gone downhill. I remembered her as vigorous, as funny, and as bright. I remembered Christmas Eves when she regaled us half the night. I didn't want to risk all that. I didn't want that pain. I didn't need to be depressed. I didn't need that strain. And what about my brother? Why not him? She's his aunt, too. I thought I had it justified, but then before I knew, the reasons not to go I so painstakingly had built were cracking wide and crumbling in an acid rain of guilt.
I put on boots and gloves and cap, shame stinging every pore, and armed with squeegee, sand, and map, I went out my front door. I drove in from the suburbs to the older part of town. The pastels of the newer homes gave way to gray and brown. I had that disembodied feeling as the car pulled up and stopped beside the wooden house that held the Christmas cup. How I got up to her door, I really couldn't tell. I watched my hand rise up and press the button of the bell. I waited, aided by my nervous rocking to and fro. I heard the rattle of the china in the hutch against the wall. The triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch came down the hall.
The clicking of the door latch and the sliding of the bolt, and a little swollen struggle popped it open with a jolt. She stood there, pale and tiny, looking fragile as an egg. I forced myself from starting at the brace that held her leg. And though her thick bifocals seemed to crack and spread her eyes, their milky and refracted depths lit up with young surprise. Come in, she laughed the words. She took me by the hand, and all my fears dissolved away as if by her command. We went inside, and then, before I knew how to react, before my eyes and ears and nose was Christmas past, alive, intact. The scent of candied oranges, of cinnamon and pine, the antique wooden soldiers in their military line, the porcelain nativity I'd always loved so much, the Dresden and the crystal I'd been told I mustn't touch. My spirit fairly bolted like a child out of class and danced among the ornaments of calico and glass. Like magic, I was 6 again, deep in a Christmas spell, steeped in the million memories the boy inside knew well. And here, among old Christmas cards, so lovingly displayed, a special place of honor for the ones we kids had made. And there, beside her rocking chair, the center of it all, my great-aunt stood and said how nice it was I'd come to call.
I sat and rattled on about the weather and the flu. She listened very patiently and then smiled and said, "What's new?" Thoughts and words began to flow. I started making sense. I lost the phony breeziness I use when I get tense. She was still passionately interested in everything I did. She was positive, encouraging, like when I was a kid. Simple generalities still sent her into fits. She demanded the specifics, the particulars, the bits. We talked about the limitations that she had had to face. She spoke with utter candor and with humor and good grace. And then, defying the reality of crutch and straightened knee, on wings of hospitality, she flew to brew the tea.
I sat alone with feelings I hadn't felt in years. I looked around at Christmas through a thick, hot blur of tears. And the candles and the holly she'd arranged on every shelf, the impossibly good cookies she still somehow baked herself. But these rich, tactile memories became quite pale and thin when measured by the Christmas my great-aunt kept deep within. Her body halved and nearly spent, but my great-aunt was whole. I saw a Christmas miracle, the triumph of a soul.
The triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch came down the hall, the rattle of the china in the hutch against the wall. She poured 2 cups, she smiled, and then she handed one to me. Then we settled back and had a cup of Christmas tea.
A Christmas Childhood by another Irishman, Patrick Kavanagh. One side of the potato pits was white with frost. How wonderful that was, how wonderful. And when we put our ears to the paling post, the music that came out was magical. The light between the ricks of hay and straw was a hole in heaven's gable. An apple tree with its December glinting fruit we saw, and oh, you, Eve, were the world that tempted me to eat the knowledge that grew in clay and death the germ within it. Now and then I can remember something of the gay garden that was childhood. Again, the tracks of cattle to a drinking place, a green stone lying sideways in a ditch, or any common sight, the transfigured face of a beauty that the world did not touch. And my father played the melodeon outside at our gate. There were stars in the morning east, and they danced to his music. Across the wild bogs, his melodeon called to Lennons and Callans. As I pulled on my trousers in a hurry, I knew some strange thing had happened. Outside in the cow house, my mother made the music of milking. The light of her stable lamp was a star, and the frost of Bethlehem made it twinkle. A water hen screeched in the bog. Mask-going feet crunched the wafer ice on the potholes. Somebody wistfully twisted the bellows wheel. And my child poet picked out the letters on the gray stone. In silver, the wonder of a Christmas townland, the winking glitter of a frosty dawn. Cassiopeia was over Cassidy's hanging hill. I looked, and 3 wind bushes rode across the horizon, the 3 wise kings. An old man passing said, "Can't he make it talk?" The melodeon. I hid in the doorway and tightened the belt of my box-pleated coat. I nicked 6 nicks on the doorpost with my penknife's big blade. There was a little one for cutting tobacco, and I was 6 Christmases of age. And my father played the melodeon, and my mother milked the cows, and I had a prayer like a white rose pinned on the Virgin Mary's blouse. I slipped a couple of things in on Hal because I knew he was going to read this old chestnut, A Christmas Carol, here soon. This is just a very short one by Marchetta Shute. It's called Presents. I wanted a rifle for Christmas. I wanted a bat and a ball. I wanted some skates and a bicycle, but I didn't want mittens at all. I wanted a whistle, and I wanted a kite. I wanted a pocket knife to shut up tight. I wanted some boots, and I wanted a kit, but I didn't want mittens one little bit. I told them I didn't like mittens. I told them as plain as plain. I told them I didn't want mittens, and they've given me mittens again. Scottish plowboy turned up a mouse's nest, November of 1785. That Scottish plowboy became a poet named Robert Burns. And this is entitled To a Moose, to a Mouse. We sleeket Karen timorous bestie. Oh, what the panic's in thy boristy. Thou need not stop a wa so hasty with picker and brattle. I would be loath to rin and chase thee with murder and paddle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. I do't not wheedles, but thou may thieve. What then? For beastie, thou maun live. A dame of nickels in a thread's a small request. I'll get the blessing with the lave and never miss it. Thy wee bit hussy, too, in ruin. It silly was the winds are strewing, and naething now to build a new un, a foggage green, and bleak December's winds ensuing best snell and keen. Thou saw the fields laid bare and waste with weary winter coming fast and cozy here. Beneath the blast thou thought to dwell, till crash the cruel coulter passed out through thy cell. That wee bit heap of leaves and stibble has cost thee money a weary nibble. Now those turned out for all thy trouble of house or hold, to thole the winter's sleety drizzle and cronrock cold. Ah, but Mousie, thou art not alane. In proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes, o might and min, gang apt agley, and lead us not but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee. But awk, I backward cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I cannot see, I guess and I fear.
Well, when Darrell said something about a year ago about doing a program together this year and went on to explain what he thought it would be, and went on explaining what he thought it would be, and went on explaining what he thought it would be. And I was shaking my head, and he finally said, "And you could do a Christmas carol." I said, "I will." But you will be happy to know not the whole thing. I can't eat the whole thing. Some people have said, "What is it you do with the Christmas carol?" I said, "I don't think it's so much what I do with it as what I do to it." I suppose it's a kind of reader's theater for one person. And obviously I have a lot of fun with it. The year was 1843 and the city was London. And the man was Charles Dickens. Dickens had a Christmas story in mind, and because he needed funds, as he often did, by the way, with his rather large family, he wrote it in a very short time and sent it to his publisher. His profits were negligible, interestingly enough, because he had insisted on a deluxe edition of the book. But since that first printing, A Christmas Carol has been published in many, many editions, and with the exception of the translated versions of the biblical account of the birth of Christ, it has become the best known and I think probably the best loved Christmas story in the English language. You all remember how it begins. That short sentence of finality. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Now mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Well, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for, I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Well, Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley's. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Well, once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had just gone 3, but it is quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting room was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who in a dismal little cell beyond was copying letters. Now Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it might be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, Fred, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah, humbug." "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Oh, come, you don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said "bah" again and followed it with "humbug." "Now don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding, buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should. Uncle, nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it? Well, yes, but you don't keep it.
Well, let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you. Much good it's ever done you.
Well, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they were really fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. Now, Bob Cratchit involuntarily applauded. And becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished that last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge. You'll keep your Christmas Day by losing your situation. Well, you're quite a powerful speaker, nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Oh, don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Oh, yes, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Why did you get married? Because I fell in love? Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Well, I want nothing from you, Uncle. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends? Good afternoon. Well, I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I've made the trial in homage to Christmas. I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last, so Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. As you know, Scrooge reluctantly gives Cratchit Christmas Day off, the whole day, and remarks, it's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But he tells him to be early the next morning. And as you also know, Scrooge goes home to his very dreary quarters, sees the door knocker on the door change remarkably into Marley's face. And later he's visited by Marley's ghost, a pitiable specter who says 3 visitors will come to visit Scrooge, even though Scrooge tries to say he'd rather not see them. And as you also know, the ghost of Christmas past appears, a small wisp of a figure, and shows the miser his former life as an unhappy boy, as an apprentice to Mr. Fezziwig, who hosts a jolly Christmas party in his warehouse for all of his employees, as a young man in love, whose offer of marriage is turned down because of his growing greed for gold. And the ghost of Christmas present comes on the scene, a great, jolly giant of a fellow, and shows him Cratchit's home on Christmas Day with Mrs. Cratchit and the children, especially Tiny Tim, who uses a crutch, and who, without additional medical aid, will probably die, the spirit tells Scrooge. And he shows him the party at Fred's house with its singing and its game playing. And he shows him 2 starving children, want and ignorance, and warns mankind of the doom which it can expect if something positive is not done for them. And then, as Marley's ghost had told Scrooge would happen, after the second ghost had finished his visit,
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knees, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. You're about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the Spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Lead on, O ghost. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, Spirit. The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city. The city rather sprung up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, amongst the merchants who hurried up and down and clinked the money in their pockets and conversed in groups and looked at their watches and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals as Scrooge had seen them ordered. The Spirit stopped beside one little lot of businessmen, and observing that the hand was pointed toward them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "Oh," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "Well, when did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Well, why, what's the matter with him? I thought he'd never die." "God knows." "Well, what's he done with his money?" "Well, I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know." And this pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "Well, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral. For upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "Well, I don't mind going if lunch is provided, but I must be fed." Another laugh. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. And wondering why and whither he had gone, he accompanied the Spirit until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he now was going to learn lay underneath the ground. The Spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question, Spirit. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Oh, no, Spirit, no. But the finger was still there. "Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Why show me this now if I am past all hope?" And for the first time,
the hand appeared to shake. Oh, good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. And holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, oh Jacob, on my knees. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy New Year to all the world. And then he laughed. Now, really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. And running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. What's today, my fine fellow? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. Today? Why, it's Christmas Day. Oh, Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner? Well, I should hope I did. Oh, an intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. What, the one as big as me? What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now. Well, go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. And the boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Now, the hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live. Scarcely ever looked at it before. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. And it was a turkey. Why, he could never have stood upon his legs, that bird. Now, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. Oh, you must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair and chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much. And shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash, and he did it. Is your master at home, my dear? Said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl. Very. He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please. Oh, thank you. He knows me, said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. Fred? Bless my soul, who's that? It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? Oh, it's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, and wonderful happiness. But he was at the office early next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that's what he had his heart set upon. And he did it. Oh, yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door open that he might see him come into his office. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too, and he was on the stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Hello. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? Well, I am very sorry. I am behind my time. You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please. Well, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. I'll tell you what. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. Therefore, I'm going to raise your salary. Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it and calling to the people in the court for help in a straight waistcoat. A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Now, make up the fire and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Well, Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in this good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. Little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, all of us. So, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.